Hello everyone, my name is Saqib Saeed and I am the Head of Research at Power Technology Research. We're recording this from CIGRE 2022 in Paris, and I have to say that it's great to be back after a break of 4 years and attend one of CIGRE's meeting, as the last event could not take place because of the pandemic. We are just 2 days into the conference, but the theme is crystal clear, and that is energy transition, and specifically if the power grid can enable this clean energy transition and make it happen faster, or can it become a bottleneck for the energy transition? There's a lot of discussion about collaboration. There's discussion going on around the barriers, be it the technical, economical, or regulatory barriers in terms of grid not supporting the clean energy transition. It's great to hear a lot of insightful discussions from industry experts. And speaking of industry experts, our today's guest is somebody who has himself given more than 30 years to this industry. Our guest today is the CEO of SmartWires, Peter Wells. So Peter, let's start a discussion about the conference itself. What's your impression so far about it? We're 2 days into the conference. What are your key takeaways, and especially what is your expectation from CIGRE as an organization, especially what its role can be on clean energy transition?
Yeah. So it's the first time I've been to CIGRE, so I don't know that I had a deep sense of what it would be like, but I definitely thought it would be very technical, with a lot of technical tracks, and I thought that would be probably the main focus. So I've been pleased that it's been a lot more industry focused, commercial, other elements, policy, and thinking about market design and so forth. So good event. I do feel that we hear a lot of the same discussion. And CIGRE, of course, is 100 years old, and I think thinking about its role at this moment in time and what the next 100 years look like. So we often talk about how the grid was one of the greatest inventions of the last century, and what we like to say at SmartWires is it needs to be the biggest tech story of the next century, specifically technology. And so what's the role of CIGRE now in getting away from just dialogue and actually making something happen, I think is the key thing. And as we look forward, as an industry, are we culturally stuck and almost in our own way, or do we have the ability to move forward with action? And how can CIGRE really step in and make that happen? I think that's the call to action that I would have for them as an organization, and what we should expect, I think, as an industry.
Right. It's a brilliant point that I think it's time that we turn this dream of clean energy transition into reality, and action needs to happen right now. In terms of the impacts that we talk about of clean energy transition onto the grid, renewable energy is one of the key factors in this theme. If we look at Europe as a region, recently there was a report from EU Horizon. It states, and I quote, that the growing share of intermittent sources of electricity is placing the power grid under unprecedented strain, making the search for flexibility a vital part of EU's green transition. What's your perspective on it? Do you think that the grid could potentially become a bottleneck towards clean energy transition, especially for Europe as a region?
I don't think it could potentially become a bottleneck. I think it is a bottleneck, and so that's where I would start. Like in the US, you've got a backlog of projects that's bigger than the existing generating capacity in the US, even now. And so we'll do the Inflation Reduction Act and other things to try to incentivize more renewable, and probably electrification as well. And I think the fundamental question I have when I see efforts like that, as great as they are, what's that going to change when it comes to the grid?
Right.
And it's an interesting situation, I think, and we have the same problem in Europe. And it feels to me that their focus is always on the generation end and the consumption end, and there's not enough focus about what's in the middle.
The grid.
And the grid ultimately, if it stays the way it is with a lot of legacy technology that isn't really going to adapt to this new paradigm of generation and consumption, it will always be a bottleneck. I just don't see a pathway to accelerating this really, the pace of change, but also the scale of change. And the grid needs to become this digital edge-to-edge capability that can adapt, be flexible, and evolve. And I think if we, as an industry globally, and politicians, regulators, focused on this notion of a global energy network that truly was a platform, a digital platform for generation and consumption innovation, my sense is that those things would just flow. And we seem to be upside down almost in terms of where our focus is. So I would love to see a lot more focus around what's the nature of the grid and what's the market design around that that's going to really enable us to move forward. I think we have the technology. It's more so the will and the cultural shift and the market design in my view.
That's absolutely was the key takeaway that I had from the keynote speech yesterday. That's the message was the technology is there.
Right.
It's the scalability, the adoption of the technology is the question. Yeah. You gave example of US as where this is already becoming a bottleneck. There are a few examples here in Europe as well. Recently, we know that in the Netherlands, this has already happened. Backlog of projects. Impact of electric vehicles is already, you can see this onto the grid. And then also the grid congestion charges in Germany, they're skyrocketing over the years. They've increased a lot. So what's at the root cause? Is it just that we have forgotten about the grid for many years? It's our tunnel vision, only our focus on to clean energy sources of generation without looking at grid as a potential enabler of clean energy. This is the reason for us looking at all these examples of grid congestion in European countries, even though the grid is heavily connected. I always thought that this region, every country is connected. You have multiple interconnections, so the flexibility is there. But we see a lot of problems popping up in different countries already.
So is the grid in the right place, I suppose, is the question in the end. When you look at countries like, it's interesting you bring up Germany and those congestion costs of I think they forecast 5 billion euros, twice what it was in 21. I was speaking to folks from the Nordic region yesterday, and their number actually is bigger.
Wow.
And so it's interesting, and a lot of places have this sort of north-south problem, or it could be, the renewable resources are somewhere, but the demand's somewhere else, and where we're generating now is not the same places where we were generating. So yes, there's a grid there, maybe it's aging, and it needs to be invested in anyway, but the grid's in the wrong place. And so we obviously need to invest in grid in general, but when you do that, you still need to be able to leverage the capacity that exists. So I think we're putting strain on the grid as an asset as it exists that we can solve with grid enhancing technology for sure. But then even when you build new lines, that doesn't make the whole grid more efficient and more effective. Right? It just means in that one particular circuit, you've got a better line.
Right.
So maybe that now takes most of the power flow, and now you're underutilizing the other assets that were there before. So you need grid enhancing technology that can look at the structure of the grid, the capability of the grid, the capacity of the grid, and can really move power flow all the way across the grid and utilize the asset base that's there. But it's clear to me that those congestion costs are coming from the fact that I can't get this cheaper, cleaner generation source from where it is to where it's needed. And just look at relative pricing. You see this in price pools where those folks that can get access to electricity that's coming from renewable sources typically are paying, some markets like 25%, let's say, 1/4 of the cost that you might be paying somewhere else because that's coming from other sources, the more traditional fossil-based sources. So I think we know what the problem is, and I do think there are solutions to it if we have the will to move forward a little bit more aggressively, I would say.
And what's the most unfair thing is that it gets pushed towards consumers. They end up paying this additional cost.
How ironic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that means there's a lot that needs to be done by the grid operators, right? Even in the Netherlands, we hear that the government is planning to intervene. It's trying to get some stakes in the distribution operators companies because they're all privately held, so they're more able to control the whole situation. Do you think regulators can play a role in this situation? It's the regulatory framework that needs to sort of redesign in the entire region.
I think we need that for sure. I would tend to look at when we segment and target different markets for the business, we're looking for market design and we're looking at regulation or policy. Those two things often obviously come together, and then technology adoption. So we know when we have all three that typically for us as a business, there's the willingness and the market that's there that will take modernizing the grid, like technology like ours, because the system operator, number one, is probably more progressive, and they already are thinking about how to digitalize the grid, but they also have a market design within which they can get rewarded for that. And I think on the regulation side, it's important because that can be another forcing function to make it crystal clear of what a system operator must do or should do. But I think even beyond that, you can look in some markets, even at say like the EPA in the US, there is a stick. Do you know what I mean? Like if you put regulation together and market design together, there is the reward if you do things in the right way, but there's also the stick that if you aren't doing things as they are regulated, maybe there's the opposite of a reward and some kind of downside. So I think we need all of those things. We need the regulation framework, we need the market design, and we need the technology adoption.
Right. And Peter, you talked about the technology being ready, and that's the message that we hear at the conference as well, right? So let's talk about the solutions now. How can grid enhancing technologies play a role in this situation, right? We hear a lot about this, utilizing this existing infrastructure. I saw a statistic this morning in a presentation that on average, building a new transmission line 100 kilometers above, it can easily take somewhere between 7 to 10 years, right? So we don't have that much time.
Yeah.
So how can we better utilize what we already have, and how can GTEs play a role in this situation?
Yeah, I've heard as long as 20 years. I think is the longest I've heard for a new line to actually. I think that was just to get the permit, not even to build it. So it can be quite extreme and excessive. I think 10 years is probably a good sort of average. So yeah, that is way too long. Grid enhancing technology, I think, is a superb option and something that we just need to leverage immediately. Because number one, you can obviously learn more about the capacity of the grid that you have today. You can also apply technology that can help you move power flow across that grid more effectively. So you're fully optimizing the utilization of that asset base. We know there's lots of capacity there. We know we can solve it. We've got numerous projects that we've run the numbers on. We've added 1.5 gigawatts of capacity on one project we did in the UK. We're adding another 500 megawatts this year to the same project by adding some more smart valves. We've done hundreds of megawatts in almost up to about 700 megawatts now in Colombia. Same in Australia. So we know all of that's feasible, and I think the combination of grid enhancing technology is super complementary, right? If you use dynamic rating, and you know that due to atmospheric conditions, I can actually get more capacity out of a certain line, I can then use modular power flow control, like the smart valve, to actually move the power there. Right. So there's ways that you can layer these technologies and adaptive modeling that I think will come and get more advanced. We need to grab them. But it's not just to solve near-term problems. And I think sometimes people think grid enhancing technology is a band-aid to a problem today. It's really not, because in my view, yes, it gives you a fast solution, but when you still build out new circuits that we need to, you also need to make sure those new circuits and new lines are being efficiently used. And you also need to know that you've gone really, I think, with this edge-to-edge digital concept of like, how am I getting to a point where I have a seamless connected grid with adaptive modeling and real-time capability? So I really do have that flexibility. I can integrate more on both sides, and I can adapt, I can balance, right? I can respond. You're not doing that with legacy technology. So I think grid enhancing technology, the beauty of it in my mind, solve problems today fast, but also I'm future-proofing the grid. I don't know what you see, but I think the days of people running 5-year plans have gone. You maybe get 3 years if you're lucky. And I think most people are saying, I'm not so confident in my data in the first instance, and I don't know what's going to happen in 3 years' time. So our ability to look forward has gotten really, I would say, reduced. So that's another argument for, well, better make sure your investments are future-proof then, meaning you have that flexibility. I can respond to what comes because I've made smart investments, and that's where, in my mind, power electronics and digital capability sets give you that. Whereas steel and copper and legacy, it doesn't really, right? It's going to solve a certain known problem, and then that's it. It certainly isn't moving anywhere, which is the other aspect of our technology, which is you can move it around physically if you need to. So I think it's a very, very powerful tool. Lots of people getting aware, certain regions pushing for it, I would say a lot more aggressively now, but I still think we have a long way to go before it becomes a mainstream tool in the toolkit. for the
You're
systems.
absolutely right, Peter, that this idea still exists, that GTs are, it's just a short-term solution. It's not something which can be helpful in the long term. And then this, very quickly evolving market, it actually impacts us as well as market research. For some of the topics, we used to have a cadence of, every 2 years we were revising our forecast. We ended up doing it every 3 months now because everything is changing so quickly. And the second point that you raised, I think that's very important, that there is a lot of spare capacity, but it needs to be utilized. It's not being utilized properly. And I hear about a lot of DSOs and TSOs saying that EVs connecting with the grid, that's not a problem because we have enough capacity. Yeah, that's true. When you look at the grid as a whole, yes, you have a lot of capacity, but you are going to have a lot of hotspots in the grid that needs to be resolved. So just saying that total capacity is there, we're going to be able to go with millions of EVs, that's fine, but all these hotspots that you're going to have in the grid, you have to sort of read out and better utilize your available capacity.
I agree. Linking them and also thinking about there'll be peaks. And how do you manage out those peaks? As even I was reading the other week about households. Households becoming more electric appliances, EVs. Most of the houses in the US were built pre-1980s. 100 amp circuits that cannot cope with this new mode of electrification. So there will be ways around it with smart panels that say, yeah, you put your dishwasher on, but we're going to hold it and run it after your laundry load's done, and you plug your vehicle in, but we'll do that overnight. And so there's going to be technologies, I think, that will balance out, but just because you have capacity doesn't mean that you're leveraging all of this intelligence and linking it and connecting it and smoothing out those peaks and solving problems before they happen. So yeah, I think we have a long way to go.
Right. And talking about the technology and available solutions, do tell us about the new product launch from SmartWires. Tell us about the features that the new product has and how is it different from the existing products in the portfolio.
Yeah, so obviously we're really excited about it. So we've done this reseller agreement with UpWind, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of LS. LS are the Slovenian TSO. And our experience at LS is they've always been very progressive and innovative with their approach. I think their market really kind of demands that of them. And they actually started to look at creating a software that could look at the thermal rating of lines and even transformers and other assets on the grid. And so they're able to monitor and look at the atmospheric conditions, so how many temperatures, wind levels, and so forth, and basically use that cooling or naturally cooler environment to say, actually, in these conditions, we can put more power flow. So it's a dynamic line rating or dynamic thermal rating. We can use it both ways. It's a very well proven technology that they've used, as I said, for 10 years plus, continuing to adapt it. What we wanted to do is that we've known, and we've worked and looked at other DLR solutions as well. But the key thing in our mind with that is it's super complementary to a smart valve. So we've got modular power flow control. It's different. So ours is more in our mind a planning level tool. I know what I can do with the smart valve, and I can always do it. So I can always move power flow and utilize the capacity on the grid. But if on a given day that capacity is changing up or down, and I want to adjust accordingly, I still need a smart valve to move that power flow around, to leverage that opportunity. Or on the other side of it, when you think about problems with extreme weather now and fires and so forth, the other way, which is how do I make sure I've got absolute security with my asset base and I'm not overloading lines and causing problems. So in our mind, the connection of the two is really powerful. They can be sold separately, and typically are, but what we wanted to do was to find a way of saying, how do we combine? And really there's a multiplier effect in our mind of like when you put those two technologies together, it has a much, much bigger impact for a customer. We know, of course, certain markets, so US with this FEC 881 rule, that's really pushing the system operators towards utilizing DLR, and they have to be able to put sensors on lines or understand what's going on lines and leverage that capability set. But again, what you know is one thing, but the ability to actually move the power flow around to take advantage of that opportunity is different. So they come together, and so that's why we we're looking, and that's why we're excited to do something with Operato. And we already have a lot of inquiries and interest around how we can combine the two things.
And it's amazing to hear that the countries in that part of the region, they're more progressive in terms of adapting.
Yeah, it's interesting. So what I've seen is that sometimes smaller countries or regions that don't have big budgets but have a lot of the same dynamics to deal with, but also often might be corridors from one market to another, dealing with a lot. And often they seem to be very progressive in thinking about how to manage that, and often very, I would say, forward-looking on technology. And if you've got a technology like ours, where basically I can do more for less, faster, they want it.
Right.
And so we've had a lot of interaction with smaller countries in our sort of Eastern Europe, Balkan region, and so forth.
Right. I think in addition to the renewables, there might be another factor at play, and that is the whole, geopolitical situation in that part of the region. Countries do want to have, autonomy in terms of security of supply, so they're already thinking about it. So in addition to renewables, this can be another factor why they'll have to adapt in terms of the great technologies.
It certainly puts a lot more pressure on the situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
We're getting some inquiries already, how would the situation look like if we were to have completely independent grid without any interconnections outside, no dependence on, energy from other countries, how would it look like, 2030 scenario, 2050 scenario, so they're already thinking about it. That's amazing to see.
Yeah.
So finally, Peter, I wanted to understand, is everybody lagging behind, or do we have some, let's say, trendsetters in this? If we were to choose Europe as an example,
yes.
Are there any countries, TSOs, which are trendsetters in this? They're already thinking about it, they've already implemented a lot of solutions in terms of better utilizing the grid capacity.
There's one country that stands out for us. It would be the UK.
Okay.
Why? They have, I would say, they've done a lot of work in general in looking at how do they move towards a net zero position as a country and an economy. And so I think they've been very specific and detailed on what that pathway looks like.
I see.
If you also then look on the grid side, again, I think they've been very innovative and they pushed the envelope really with legal regulatory frameworks.
Okay.
So the RIO framework, which is absolutely incentivizing innovation on the grid and also benefits the consumer. So at the end of the day, if the system operator can reduce congestion costs to the consumer, some of that saving can come back to the system operator as a benefit for doing that project.
Right.
So this sort of shared savings and really this, I would say, focus on the consumer, but also on innovation is really palpable there. You can see the impact. We've also had great experience like UK Power Networks and National Grid, and we've done work with both and a lot of work with National Grid. They're very progressive, and I think they're really looking forward and saying, what is the utility model of tomorrow?
Right.
Like how we operate today and make money is one thing, but what does that look like in 5 years, 10 years? And I think they're being very deliberate around how to evolve, working within a framework that's there, of course, but also I think going beyond that, saying let's not just sit back and wait for what may happen. Let's be a little bit more intentional with our approach. So that market, because it's got those elements to it, for us it's been very progressive, and we've seen a lot of traction around the technology. They're also moving towards this future system operator, right, where they're really looking at not just one element of energy, but like the sort of the entire system, if you will, and what can that entity do to drive everybody towards the future. So when you look at those different elements, that's by far and away the most sort of progressive market that we've seen. There are other places, I think, that are touching on elements of it, right, and doing different things. And we see other regions like Australia, super high level of transparency, which means you have to justify the investment, which means our technology plays well. Do more for less, faster, right? And then you look South America, places like Colombia, lots of competition, so the TSOs are competing to do the work. Same thing, can I do more with less, faster? And can I future-proof my investment and add on it later? So again, that our technology and technology like ours fit really well there because it puts them in a strong position. So different flavors. So for us, we think of the shared savings, the consumer focus, the transparency, the competitive elements. Those are really important parts of the landscape. And the more we see that everywhere, the faster we'll be moving, for sure.
Right. Great. Thank you so much, Peter. If I were to just summarize our discussion, so for me, the key takeaways are that the technology is ready. It's just, the system operators need to think about how to quickly utilize what they already have. Of course, long-term plans will already be there. They're already thinking about 2030 scenario, 2040. But these technology solutions are not short-term. They're going to resolve their problems for the next 10, 20 years as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think to add on that, I would say none of this will get there on our own. And there's so much knowledge and capability across the industry with the system operators, and we have different vendors, different technology players, regulators, and so forth. How do we bring all of that knowledge together and sort of partner more and collaborate more to drive, obviously, forward at a faster pace? All the opportunities there. Again, we just need to have the willpower to go for it.
Collaboration seems to be the theme of the conference as well. I have heard everybody say, all the tier 1 OEMs, they keep on saying that everybody needs to collaborate. It's not a problem that one company can solve.
Scale up the challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.